is where we discuss the possibilities.
Started or
with gratitude. Hey guys, Dr. Kori Propst here with Dr. Joe Klemczewski at The Diet Doc. Welcome to the Diet Doc Life Mastery Podcast. Today's topic, mindfulness. Joe, so we're doing this 50-day challenge with about 60 clients now. And every day they're just posting these very nuanced, creative, insightful questions and just observations about their experiences. And I thought it would be fun to kind of go through what one of them shared with me and kind of tease that apart, because in terms of mindfulness, I think there are a lot of misconceptions about what it is, what it can look like, and what it can provide for us in terms of changing our behavior. So, you in?
Good deal. I like it.
Awesome. Okay. So, This was a message that I received from one of these clients. She said, Kori, this weekend sucked. She said, I just let myself go, literally. And her next statement was, why am I like this? With triple exclamation points. There were no question marks. It was exclamation points. And you know, for me, I'm big on questions and the way we frame questions and ask questions of ourselves. And are these questions really invitational? Like, are we inviting an answer in curiosity? Or is it a very powerful statement that just kind of stops us and helps and kind of leads to a sense of stuckness? So that was my first observation as I'm reading it. And so I responded with, well, how are you? Because she'd said, why am I like this? And I was like, well, how are you? What are you like? And then how would you prefer to be? Because the inclination, I mean, she was insinuating that if she's asking, why am I like this, that she shouldn't be this way, right? I mean, is that kind of what you get from it too?
Well, the first thing I think of is how that question has been asked for thousands of years by philosophers, because when you just throw that out there as dogmatically as you did, why am I like this? Mm-hmm. There's a lot to pull out of that.
Yeah, there's a lot to wade through and tease apart, and so I did. I wanted to get a little more centered and kind of rein her in a bit. So she said, well, I would prefer not to let my emotions dictate my actions. Okay. My first thought after reading that, Joe, was this. I would actually love for your emotions to dictate your actions. Specifically, like actions that engage compassion and curiosity and, you know, a new level of interest and actions that are like aligned with your values. That would be pretty ideal, wouldn't it? Versus emotions that dictate actions related to shame and frustration and discouragement and hiding and distraction. Because in our work together, that's what happens. And that's where she ends up just going off the deep end, feeling like she's on that edge, letting herself down, feeling incredibly disappointed. So I get where she's coming from, and yet when I responded to her that way, it was in an effort to show her that emotions aren't bad. They can actually move us towards very positive behavior if we can learn to approach and perceive them differently. Is this making sense?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I think about, of course, and you could probably predict this, is integration of the brain and her focus on emotions, and then you saying, well, let's stay there for a minute, you know, takes me back to the fact that the brain stem and the amygdala, threat perception, all that, then siphons right into the limbic system. So you're gonna feel that, but then that does dictate, or it starts to influence your cortex, which is going to be what drives your ultimate decision making. So, I mean, if that's the center, if she has this very, very powerful emotion, then you have to decide how I'm going to start integrating these other parts of my brain. And I think that, I mean, you know, where I would like to go with this whole science or fiction segment of our podcast is, how does that happen? And to answer her question, how do I control that? First of all, I have to know what's all inside my 3-pound mushy brain. And then I have to understand that I can control it and integrate it. So there's a whole lot of stuff we could talk about here.
Yeah, we could go in many different directions. I do want to say, because my brain kept pinging when you said control, control, control. And I do think that can get in the way of us practicing mindfulness, and we'll describe what that is, in a way that moves us towards this integrated place, like you said, where our actions align with our values, and we're not in this place of either chaos or rigidity. When we're disintegrated, when we feel like we're disintegrating, literally, emotionally, that's where we're at. We're either in a place of complete rigidity, where we're not going to move, it can't be this way, it has to change, it should be like, it's not meeting my expectations, or we're feeling really chaotic and unfocused, and we don't have any clarity, and we don't know which way to turn. And I'm betting that a lot of people who are listening to us can relate to either this one space or this space. Integrated is in the middle. So by practicing a new approach and a new way of relating to, I want to use those two words instead of controlling, a new way of relating to that emotional experience, we can move into actions that are more in our service and more in our favor. So I have a question for you. Probably 2 or 3 years ago, we had a conversation about self-compassion. And
are you gonna make me cry in this podcast?
Maybe. I have, like, it's your turn. Whatever. So you were like, what is that? And I think you were probably in the that sounds really weak camp. And as I explained it to you, it was, well, you know, in a lot of situations, you're super hard on yourself. You're just blasting yourself when something doesn't go the way that you think it should. That's not how you are with the people you care about, though. You're incredibly kind and compassionate and caring and nurturing. And so what if you treated yourself like you treat your friends and those that are important to you? And, you know, that was like mind blown for you. You said that like, wow, I've never heard it explained that way. That makes all the difference for me in terms of how I could approach myself differently when there's been adversity or a disappointment or a challenge in my life. And I think that spurred you to also take on a mindfulness practice. Am I getting the kind of sequence of events right? Okay. So can I ask you, what was your impetus, and what's that look like for you, and what has it done for you?
Okay, so probably going back. Well, first of all, it's very interesting to me that since I've been probably 20 or 22 years old, I've just had a handful of therapists and counselors as friends. And of course, it's part of my life and education, so I love the topic. But at one point about 5 years ago, I decided, you know, there are some things in my life that I really want to change and improve and progress and sort out. And I thought, you know, instead of just asking these friends who are psychologists and counselors, I really probably want to go through a professional experience. So I ended up hiring somebody locally who is a therapist, and we went through a lot of just self-reflective type stuff, relationship type stuff, helping me understand the way my own brain works, and especially looking at expectations in all areas of life, But then I also found a really cool guy online. He was in California, and his specialty was kind of anxiety and also change. He helped people change through different phases of life. That was his thing. So I sought input. There was actually one or two other counselors here locally that I met with. And so I really took it upon myself to make this a project. I even started a binder and started journaling, life schema type things. But talking to you, and I know we even went to a seminar with Dr. Dan Siegel and Doctors John and Julie Gottman. Yep. And so some of the greatest psychologists and therapists of our time, of our generation, and reading their book. So all of that to say, I really did take this seriously, and I really wanted to start living with more intent. So my process for mindfulness, because that really does mean something different to everybody. Every time you say that word, right. I think a lot of people just think, oh, it's deep breathing techniques. It's just relaxing and calming yourself down.
And clearing your mind, which is not at all. Okay.
And I wanted aggressive neural plastic change.
Nothing less for Dr. Joe.
Right, go figure, right? I knew for me to uncover parts of my brain that may not be integrated well, or that I may not be using and overusing other parts, I really had to get in there and understand things. So I like Dan Siegel's approach to meditation, because it's an active meditation. It's thinking about certain things and taking yourself through certain exercises. So you are doing some active integration. I did try some, just, all the deep breathing stuff. And interestingly, I was able to even just create some visual exercises where I could just put myself to sleep instantly. It's a great technique, by the way. If your mind's scrambling, you can't sleep, I can do this thing and I can be asleep in like 3 seconds.
Well, okay.
But I'll finish by just saying this, and then you can probe a little bit deeper into my content here. But it was really an active approach of seeking change. Specifically, I've always questioned knowing that the definition of happiness or contentment is what you expect and what you achieve, or what the outcome is. And that's your distance point. So if you're not always going to achieve, maybe you need to adjust your expectations. Should be going this way. So you have a better chance at that. And I really needed to hear some things that my local therapist said, which is, one, Joe, you do realize this is as good as it gets. That was a powerful statement of philosophical absurdism to me, which is, you don't have to keep striving for everything. Just, this is as good as it gets.
Can I interrupt for a second?
No, yeah, go ahead.
When we look at that from a happiness perspective, the word that comes to mind to me is chasing happiness. So if we're always chasing the next thing and that outcome, we're going to get a blip of happiness. Like on the happiness scale, we're going to see that point move up. But guess what? We have a baseline happiness level. All of us do. 40% of our happiness is based on what we do, how we act, how we think, and different practices that we engage in. So we can modify our happiness. But 50% of it is genetic, and then 10% of it is circumstantial based on whatever is happening within the environment. But so, I agree with you. A lot of it is related to how we view happiness and how we believe that we can achieve that. This is as good as it gets. Can be just kind of bring us back to reality a bit, I guess, and not striving so much and feeling this internal negative pressure. In a recent sessions I had with a client, I said to her, it feels to me like you're running away from something, and like you're trying to, something's chasing you. That's what that proving mentality feels like, versus here's an outcome that you're really super excited about and interested in and curious about, and you're running towards it, which is that's a positive pressure. But so where were you on that? That's
exactly how I took it initially. When he said that, It was one of those moments, sometimes somebody says something or you experience something and like, wow, this moment, I've got to freeze frame it because it's a powerful thing I need to feel and explore.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as he said that, we were on the sidewalk, saying goodbye to each other, going our different ways. And I just stopped and I'm like, gosh, that feels like a punch in the gut, but I know it's right. And it's like you said, it's not a negative thing. It's not like, hey, life sucks, so just get used to it. It was that thing of acceptance. And I think in combination with other things he had told me, because I'm an idealist and he's always been after me, that I'm, marital idealism and occupational idealism. And one of the things he said, which I've heard a million times, but he framed it in a way that meant more, was somebody else can't be responsible for your happiness. And I always took that as, well, whatever relationship we're talking about, whether it's a friend or a partner or something else, it's like, well, they have to be responsible for their part of the relationship. But for me to retract away and say, look, I don't have to get anything from them. I don't have to have the ideal thing. And this is what I mean about expectation.
Yeah.
If I just focus on giving and being, then probably, number one, because my expectations are adjusted, life is just happier. Mm-hmm. And then if I'm operating in that mode, I'm probably going to be attracting more of that myself from those people. Mm-hmm. So I know that was the intent of what he meant. And those are those kind of shifts that, as I started with, you can hear those words and say, well, that's cool. And you move on like a meme. Right. And I knew, because of neuroplasticity and emotional growth and the changes that physically happen in your brain, I had to act on that. It's not just saying, cool, thanks, thanks for the session. Yeah. It's now, how do I make that real and lasting because of the physical change in my brain?
So coming back to mindfulness is a practice that can put us on a path towards making those physical changes in our brains so that we can act in that more, I think non-identified is a good word, or it's a way of acting in a non-attached, clingy sort of way to expectations. And what you are essentially doing is training your mind. That's what mindfulness is. It's attention training. So what am I actually paying attention to here? Where am I letting my attention land? Do I want it to land on, and using your example of in a relationship, do I want it to land on the things I'm not getting, or that this person is not doing that I think they should be doing? Or do I want to let my attention land on, how can I realign with my values, my core strengths, and be the person that I know that I can be in a more contributory way?
And they've even studied this. This is what's fascinating to me. So what you're describing, this is probably part of the pattern of my life. When I was 18 years old and a college freshman, the very first elective I ever signed up for in college was stress management.
Yeah, I remember.
Even back then, I realized I'm an anxiety-based person. And if I get ramped up doing something, I'm going to lose a night's sleep. I'm going to wake up at 2 a.m. and not be able to go back to sleep. So there have been times through the years where I'm just up all night working, maybe not sleeping for 2 or 3 days, go to the office at midnight.
Yeah.
And when I decided a couple years ago that, that's just a pretty shitty way to live your life, I started doing these exercises you would call active meditation. And I'm telling you, I have not lost a night of sleep in 2 years. Mm-hmm. And it's not because I go to bed in some Zen position. Mm-hmm. Some nights I do have to go through those exercises again, but I've channeled right into it now. And these studies looking at kids as young as, first grade, kindergarten, they've looked at people with social anxiety disorder. They've looked at depression. They've looked at even aggression. And there is physical measurable change in the amygdala. Sure. So the part of our brain that is really controlling that threat perception, goes through structural change.
And the
that's
prefrontal cortex does too, as a result of engaging in mindfulness exercises, because it's significantly involved in communicating with the amygdala when we are reducing that intensity level of emotion by through the practice of mindfulness and integration.
Yeah, I feel like this whole topic is not just profound in a way that it can change anybody's life, but it's a very difficult undertaking because, like I said, it's not about just sitting down and learning to breathe, although that might be the first step.
Yes.
Mindfulness conjures an image that, you just have to become aware of a thought. Oh, this is a negative thought. And again, that's the first step. But man, it takes freaking years and practice to really get your brain to physically change where that becomes part of your biochemistry.
Well, so there's the brain change part, but then there's the acute effects of engaging in a mindfulness practice. Someone had posted recently, thinking about starting to practice mindfulness, like, I really want to clear my mind. And my first response to it was, well, that's not the point, because our minds have thoughts. That's what they do. Your mind is working if you have thoughts. And so engaging in mindfulness is not about getting rid of thoughts. It's about learning how to approach those thoughts and relate to them differently and not allow them to become a belief, become a directive for you. So if I have the thought, oh, cake, there's cake downstairs in the fridge. That's not a directive to get up out of my chair and go eat cake. It's also not something to be judged like, oh, why can't I stop thinking about cake? It's a string of words. So mindfulness is being able to say, oh, just had a cake thought. Redirect your attention. So the practice, just to go through it really briefly, because I agree with you, sometimes it's most helpful for people to get started just on what's called a breathing meditation. Remember, this is a practice of training your attention. We talk about metabolic positioning our metabolism in the way that's going to net us the most effective fat loss. Well, guys, this is attentional positioning. Positioning our attention. And I could get totally distracted in what just happened right now and get all anxious right now that I've messed up the podcast, but I'm not going to. I'm going to let that thought go.
Totally ruined. We're going to cut the whole thing.
Attentional positioning our attention in a manner that's going to net us the best, most effective way of approaching our thoughts and our emotions so that we can respond in the most effective way. So sitting, lying down, just sit in a comfortable position, and you can leave your eyes open. You can close them, whatever's most comfortable for you. But focus initially, just like if you put your hands on your stomach, you're in your diaphragm area, and just breathe normally. But put your attention towards the up and down movement of your stomach as you breathe. And the way I started off, Joe, was I set my timer on my phone for 5 minutes. I'm just going to do this for 5 minutes and to train my attention. Okay, now I'm just focusing on my breathing right now. Just concentrating right there. I'm zeroing my attention on the movement of my stomach. Now, inevitably what happens is we notice at some point that we're thinking about lunch or the conversation that we had with a client yesterday, or the dinner that's in the crock pot, or the report that we have to write. That's a thought. And most people will go to, I can't do this. I can't do it right because I get distracted and I have all these thoughts. Well, the second that you notice that you're off and on that thought means success. Now you're awake. You just recognize that you are off and running somewhere else, and then that's your opportunity to come back to the breathing as your focus. So it is this process of focus, and then it's almost like, for those of you who have children, right? They run off and you have to go get them and bring them back, and they run off and you have to go get them and bring them back. But the point is to do the bringing back gently and kindly and not to judge it. It's just an awareness of, wow, look at all the places that my mind is going. And so you get really, really well acquainted with the types of thoughts you have, how you think, what you think about most often, but to do it in a way that it's not valenced. There's no judgment. It's very neutral, because your mind is doing what your mind does. But the benefits of that attentional training are vast. Like you said, the more we practice, the greater capacity we have to refocus when we need to, when our minds wander. And our minds are wandering. Like, there's a Harvard study that showed our minds wander 50% of the time. That's just the default, what's called the default mode network of the brain. So, those who engage in mindfulness as attention training, they can expect a lot of different positive results, like reduced stress, greater focus and clarity, improved coping. And this is where, the story at the start of the podcast comes in, where I'm going to be teaching my client what being mindful is, so that what she would call negative emotions, the uncomfortable ones, the ones she doesn't particularly want to feel, don't lead to these negative behaviors that take her further away from what she wants to accomplish and feels is her best self. So
great. And instead of negative behaviors, Kori, we need some positive behaviors from our listeners, which is, we are getting more and more great comments from you guys. I get tons of private messages on different topics we've discussed. And if you have time, it'd be great if you drop a couple of those onto our YouTube channel or our iTunes channel, just so we get some favorable reviews there. Mm-hmm. But we appreciate your attention and mindfulness to this. And Kori, excellent information on how the brain works. And I know we're going to go into deeper subtopics of mindfulness. But we just want to say thanks, guys, for your time and attention. And we'll see you again next time.
Thank you. Bye, guys.